The rain fell soft as lace, fine as sorrow stitched through summer heat, hushing the dust that clung to the bones of old buildings and broken men. It was the kind of rain that softened gunpowder and memories alike. Most folks stayed indoors, sipping weak coffee and pretending not to notice the thunder grumbling like a warning just beyond the hills. But she rode in anyway, soaked to the skin, a widow carved from silence and spine, her coat heavy with road and resolve. She didn't turn heads right away. Not in a town like Larkspur, where women were scarce and always watched, but never really seen. They figured her for a drifter, maybe someone's runaway bride or a preacher's daughter who'd taken a wrong fork in the trail. The kind of woman who'd be gone by morning. But she didn't carry herself like someone passing through. Her horse was lathered and lean, its eyes red-veined and weary. She dismounted without a word, boots sliding into the muck as though the land itself was trying to hold her back. She tipped her chin to the livery boy and handed off the reins, not bothering to negotiate the price. Let the boy take what he needed. She had other debts to settle. The rain soaked through her hat brim, dripped past the edge of her collar, and traced the hollow of her throat like a prayer. Beneath her coat, she carried a revolver, old, pearl-handled, kissed by time. It wasn't her father's or her brother's. It had belonged to a man who once loved her enough to build a home with calloused hands and dreams scraped together from ash and iron. That man was gone. And somewhere in this town or the next one over was the reason. She didn't knock the saloon doors open like the dime novels like to say. No drama, no thunderclap of entrance. Just one slow push, her boots steady on warped wood. The warmth inside was immediate. Smoke, sweat, and liquor, humming with off-key piano and broken laughter. A girl in a blue dress glanced up from a card game and blinked fast, surprised by the shape of her. The men saw her a heartbeat later. Conversation hiccuped. Then someone snorted. Laughter unfurled like a rope dropped into mud. Well, hell. Look what wandered in. Thought this was a men's saloon. She said nothing. Her eyes swept the room, not in fear, but in measure. She wasn't here to demand respect. She was here to listen, to look, to find the face she'd seen in her dreams and nightmares both, the man who'd grinned as her husband bled out in dirt. "You lost, miss," another voice called. Younger, meaner, or just thirsty for the wrong kind of company. Her steps echoed slow on the floorboards as she moved to the bar. Her coat steamed slightly in the heat. The barkeep looked uncertain, cleaning the same glass twice. "Whiskey," she said. Her voice was low, smoked smooth, without apology. The barkeep hesitated, then poured. She took the glass, but didn't drink. The man who'd spoken first rose, all lean menace and too many buttons undone. His smile was the kind used to corner things weaker than himself. "You aiming to join the game, sweetheart, or just planning to keep standing there like a ghost?" She turned her head slowly, met his eyes without flinching. Rainwater trickled from her hat brim onto the floor. She raised her glass in a mock toast. Then, without ceremony, she set it down and reached beneath her coat. The room stilled. The girl in the blue dress stopped dealing cards. The piano notes fumbled and died. Her hand came back with the revolver, not pointed, not cocked. Just held, careful and clean, like something holy. "I don't play cards," she said. Her eyes flicked toward the man's belt, the edge of his pistol. "But I've buried someone who did." The words landed like stone in a pond. No one moved. Even the barkeep stepped back. She didn't raise the gun. She didn't have to. The weight of it, the calm of it, said everything. The man swallowed, hands lifting ever so slightly. "Didn't mean nothing by it," he mumbled. She holstered the revolver. The moment passed. But the room had changed. She turned then and walked past him, past the tables of men who suddenly had nothing to say. Her steps led to a corner near the stove, where an old map of the region was nailed to the wall, curling at the corners. She studied it with the kind of intensity usually saved for scripture. Behind her, conversations resumed, quieter now, like folks trying not to wake a sleeping animal. Only one man kept watching her. He sat alone near the window, boots muddy, hat low. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't spoken. Just watched her the way quiet men do when they've seen too much to be surprised anymore. Their eyes met for a second. He didn't nod, didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. And somehow, that was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. She turned back to the map. A finger traced the trail from Abilene to Larkspur. Her mind worked like smoke curling up a chimney, slow, deliberate, reaching higher. A voice from behind startled her. Not the man at the window, but the barkeep. "You looking for someone?" he asked cautiously. "I'll know him when I see him," she replied, still facing the map. He hesitated. "A lot of men pass through here." "Good." She turned then. "I plan to ask them questions." He didn't press. Just nodded once and moved back to his bar, wiping the same glass again as if it held secrets. She stepped back out into the rain soon after. Didn't finish her whiskey. Didn't wait for someone to follow. The town looked different now. Not safer, just smaller. She walked slowly toward the boarding house, coat dragging like a funeral train, the revolver a quiet heartbeat at her side. Thunder cracked far off, not loud, but steady. She paused at the corner, beneath the rusted iron sign that marked the blacksmith's old shop. A memory bloomed sharp, her husband, bare-armed and laughing, ash on his cheek, calling her his good luck charm. That was the last summer they had. Before the letter. Before the shooting. Before the silence. She stood there in the rain, letting it soak her through again. Not to wash away the past. The past was carved too deep, but maybe to soften the weight of it. Behind her, a window creaked open. She didn't turn, but she knew who watched. The man by the window. The one who didn't laugh. She could feel his gaze like the warmth of a fire you're not ready to sit by yet. She moved on. The boarding house had a porch and a dog asleep under it. The landlady barely looked up when she paid for the night in coin and silence. In the room upstairs, she laid out her few things. The revolver, the photo of her husband, and a folded page with smeared ink. The last letter he wrote her, unfinished, still smelling faintly of iron and smoke. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window as the rain thickened into night. Somewhere beyond the hills, Justice was still walking, slow as she was. But it was coming. She would see to it. And if the trail ended here, in this small half-forgotten town with men who laughed at widows and didn't watch their backs, so be it. She was done being underestimated. Outside, thunder rolled again. She listened, steady as stone. And in the saloon down the road, laughter had died like a candle left too long in the wind. Under the weeping sky, the morning light arrived late and gray, shivering across the rooftops like a secret too tired to keep itself. Larkspur woke slowly. Rain still clung to the eaves and soaked the dirt until it was less earth and more memory. The woman rose early, long before the town had the courage to stretch its limbs, and stood barefoot by the window of her rented room. Her revolver lay on the sill like a promise whispered in metal. She didn't need to hold it to feel its weight. She tied her hair back with a piece of muslin. Plain, serviceable. She dressed in silence. The photo of her husband remained tucked in the satchel slung over her shoulder, wrapped in oilcloth beside the half-charred letter she still couldn't read without her breath catching. The man who wrote it had hands stronger than oak and a voice that used to make her laugh, soft and sudden. Now he was just a name that stirred other names, one she was still chasing across dry lands and dark taverns. She stepped outside into the breath of morning. The rain had thinned but not gone. It left pearls on porch railings, turned the street into a quiet river of boots and horses. She didn't ride that day. She walked, letting the soles of her boots speak for her as she passed shuttered shops and the slow yawns of a waking town. The saloon loomed ahead, still carrying the echo of yesterday's laughter. Inside, the world was already tilting back into its old rhythm. Smoke from last night's cigars still clung to the rafters, and someone had started the piano again. Soft, unsure notes feeling their way back into familiarity. The girl in the blue dress was there, moving between tables with practiced charm, her braid damp and clinging to the back of her neck. The woman stepped through the door like she belonged there this time, coat open, eyes sharp. Conversations faltered, not silence this time, but a hush of wariness. Even the drunks remembered her now. Especially him, the one who'd mocked her, still seated at the same table. his hat tipped back, boots crossed on the bench beside him. He looked up and sneered, but there was hesitation now. His hand went instinctively to his hip, fingers brushing the edge of his belt. She noticed. Didn't flinch. "Well, look what the storm dragged back," he muttered. "You come to finish what you didn't start?" She didn't answer him. Her gaze moved past, to the man near the window, the quiet one. He was still there, seated alone, turning his coffee cup slowly in calloused hands. His hat was different today, darker, wide-brimmed and pulled low. But his eyes were unchanged, observant, unreadable. The loud man leaned back in his chair, louder now to cover the tension he felt. "You got a name, widow? Or should we just keep calling you Trouble?" This time she did speak. "Call me nothing." He laughed again, but it was a brittle sound. "Lady walks in here like she's got bullets to spare, don't even say who she is. That ain't bold, sweetheart. That's foolish. I'm not here for your approval." Her voice was a river smoothed by stone. "You're not here for much, far as I can tell. I'm here for a man." That caught him. The room shifted again. Chairs scraped gently as if even the furniture was uneasy. "You think I'm him?" His tone curled into a smirk. "No," she said flatly. "You're too loud." The room broke. Some laughed, some watched. The girl in the blue dress turned away, stifling a smile. His pride stung, but he didn't rise. Not yet. He picked up his glass instead and leaned back, eyeing her like a dog forced to yield but not yet beaten. "Careful," he said, swilling the last of his drink. "This town's not kind to women who don't know their place." "I know mine," she said. "Do you?" It landed hard. Even the piano player stopped for a beat. But before anything more could ignite, a deep voice cut through from the window. "Let her be." It was the quiet man. He hadn't raised his head. Just sat there, hands still wrapped around the coffee cup, as calm as wind through cottonwood leaves. The loud man bristled. "Who asked you?" "I'm not asking," the quiet one replied, his voice like worn leather. "No threat, just truth. You want trouble, pick someone itching for it." The tension stretched, held, then broke. The loud man spat, muttered something under his breath, and stood. He holstered his pride and swaggered out, bumping her shoulder harder than necessary on the way past. She didn't move, didn't give him the dignity of flinching. The saloon exhaled. She turned then to the man by the window. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, not gratitude, not yet, but acknowledgment. She walked over slowly, boots thudding soft. "Mind if I sit?" He gestured to the seat across from him. Up close, he looked older than she expected. Not old in years, but in gaze. A man weathered by life, not worn out by it. His hands bore stories, scarred knuckles, fingernails trimmed short, skin sun-browned and dusted with quiet labor. "You don't speak unless it matters," she said. He nodded once. "Good," she replied. "I'm tired of noise." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. The sky was brightening behind torn clouds. He poured her a cup of coffee from the tin pot at his elbow, handed it without comment. She accepted, wrapped her hands around the warmth. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. Her answer came slow. "Looking for a man who killed someone dear to me." "Name?" "Don't have one. Not yet. Just a face. And a scar." He nodded, not prying. "You seen many men with scars?" she asked. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth tilted. "Out here, everyone's got one. Just depends if it's skin or soul." She considered that. "I've got both." "I figured." A pause stretched again. It wasn't uncomfortable, just cautious. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her satchel. Not the letter, but a drawing, pencil sketch, rough but precise. A face with a line of ink down one cheek. "I'm told he might be using a different name now. Hiding out somewhere along the cattle trail. Gambler." Shot my husband when he wasn't looking. The man studied the sketch. You got close before? Once. In Wichita. But I was too slow. You sure he's here? No, she admitted. But the trail keeps circling this place. He handed the sketch back gently. I'll ask around. Quietly. She met his eyes. Why help me? Because you don't scream when folks laugh at you. And because you didn't pull that trigger yesterday, though you had reason. That's not justice, she said. That's noise. He nodded. Most folks can't tell the difference. The girl in the blue dress passed by again. She placed a plate of eggs and bread on the table, unasked. On the house, she said, eyes kind. You eat like someone with miles ahead. The woman murmured thanks. Hunger touched her, sudden and sharp. She ate slowly, savoring the food more for what it represented than what it tasted like. I didn't catch your name, she said to the man. Colt. She blinked. Like the gun. He shrugged. Like the horse. I used to run too. She thought about telling him hers, but something held her. Names were power. Maybe later. When the plate was empty and the coffee gone cold, she stood. I'll be at the blacksmith's next, she said. He used to know my husband. Maybe he remembers more than I do. Colt rose as well. I'll walk you there. She didn't object. They moved through the saloon together, not touching, not speaking. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't wary anymore. It was waiting. Outside, the sky had cleared. Puddles gleamed like mirrors. The town moved around them, merchants opening shutters, a boy chasing a dog down the street. Life returning to the bones of the place. The blacksmith shop stood at the edge of town, old and stooped like a man grown tired of watching hammers fall. Inside, it smelled of ash and effort. The blacksmith, a wiry man with soot in his beard, recognized her at once. You're Will Calder's wife, he said, eyes narrowing with a mix of memory and sadness. She nodded. I need to know about the men he worked with. Any that turned bitter. Any that vanished after he died. The blacksmith scratched his jaw. There was one. Didn't trust him. Came through with a group heading west. Had a scar on his cheek, like someone tried to carve him open but didn't finish the job. Her breath caught. Name. Called himself Rafe. But that didn't sit right. Felt like a mask. Colt stepped closer. Where'd he go? The blacksmith pointed east. Toward Bitter Ridge. Heard he'd taken up dealing cards in some tent saloon out that way. Mean as a snake. The woman tucked the name away like a bullet. When they left the forge, the sun had broken through completely. Steam rose from the street. The scent of iron clung to her coat. She turned to Colt. You ever been to Bitter Ridge? He nodded. Years ago. Rough place. I'll need a guide. He didn't hesitate. I'll saddle the horses. She didn't say thank you. Not yet. But she met his gaze for a long moment. And when she finally turned, there was a new steadiness in her step. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. Behind them, the town carried on. But something had shifted. In the quiet man who chose to walk beside her. And in the widow who'd stopped walking alone. The trail out of Larkspur was narrow and rutted, worn down by hooves and hope alike. Rain had softened it to a slick ribbon of clay that clung to the hooves of their horses and the hem of her coat. The widow rode with her eyes forward, spine straight, but her grip on the reins was loose, thoughtful. Colt rode beside her in silence, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence but presence. Steady, like the hum of something dependable just beneath the skin. Neither had spoken since leaving the blacksmith's shop. There was nothing wasted between them, no need for small talk. Their silence was the kind that built trust instead of breaking it. It said, I will not demand more than you can give. The hills unfurled before them like forgotten prayers, and trees whispered along the ridges, dark against the pewter sky. Here and there, summer wildflowers nodded under the weight of lingering rain. The widow let her eyes skim the landscape, not looking for beauty, but for memory. Every town, every trail, felt like a place he might have walked. 100 shadows had worn her husband's boots since his death, and each one had left her chasing ghosts. She felt Colt's gaze now and then, not intrusive, just noting. He wasn't studying her out of curiosity, but caution. Like a man measuring the strength of a bridge before he crossed it. She respected that. It meant he took things seriously. As they crested a small rise, she pulled her horse to a stop. Below, the land flattened briefly into a clearing, and beside a wide-armed cottonwood stood a weather-worn shack. The roof sagged in the middle, and the chimney leaned east, but the door was still hinged, and smoke curled faint from a pipe along the back. "My husband and I camped here once," she said softly. Her voice sounded strange in the open air, as if it belonged to another time. Colt stopped beside her. He didn't ask questions. Just waited. "We came through the first summer we married. Slept on the ground. I remember the stars looked close enough to touch." She dismounted slowly, her boots sinking into the softened grass. "I'd like to rest here for a while. Won't be long." He nodded. "I'll check the perimeter. Make sure we're not sharing it with anyone who means harm." She watched him move away with quiet efficiency, disappearing among the trees. Then she walked to the shack, fingers brushing the doorframe. The wood was soft from weather, but still held its shape. Inside, the air was dry and close, and smelled of dust, wood smoke, and the faintest trace of old soap. She remembered washing her hands here, laughing when the basin tipped. She sank down beside the fireplace and unwrapped the letter again. The ink had blurred in places, but the words were still mostly legible. "My dearest Eve," it began, and her throat tightened. She hadn't heard her name spoken with affection in over a year. Not since the day she'd cradled his body and whispered his name through a mouth full of blood and disbelief. "If this letter finds you," it continued, "then I reckon you've got more courage than I ever deserved. The job I took may not be what I thought. If something happens to me, don't follow. Please. Let it be." But she had followed. Because she'd loved him fiercely. Because the world had stolen something good and dared to keep walking like it hadn't. The door creaked. Colt stood there, hat in hand. "Clear?" she asked. He nodded. "We've got quiet on all sides. You want to stay here the night?" She hesitated. "Just till the light softens. Then I want to keep riding." He stepped in, closed the door behind him. Sat near the hearth, but not too close. "You too," he paused, choosing the word carefully. "Seemed like you fit." "We did," she replied. He was kind without being soft. Gave more than he had most days. "What happened?" She drew in a long breath. He was offered a job escorting a payroll wagon. Said it was safe. Routine. Turned out to be a setup. One of the riders turned on them. Shot him in the back when he wasn't looking. Colt didn't move, but something in his face shifted. They robbed the others, left them for the buzzards. Someone from a nearby ranch found the bodies 3 days later. They buried them proper. Sent me what they found in his coat. She reached into her satchel and took out the small pouch. Opened it. Inside was a watch with a cracked face, a coin with a bullet dent, and a hand-drawn map with a bloodstain near the edge. "I've been chasing the trail of that scar-faced man ever since. He's always just ahead. A whisper here, a memory there. And Bitter Ridge is the loudest whisper I've heard yet." Colt leaned forward. "You ever wonder what you'll do if you catch him?" She stared into the ashes of the hearth. "Every day. And I haven't decided." Colt looked at her with something close to understanding. Vengeance and justice were the same face until the last second. Then they changed their clothes. She looked at him then, surprised by the poetry in his words. "Did you lose someone?" she asked. He nodded once. "Sister. She married a man who drank more than he worked. I tried to pull her out. By the time I got there, it was too late." "I'm sorry." "So am I." They sat in silence again, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Eventually, Eve stood and moved toward the window. The sky had begun its slow slide into evening, and the clouds had opened just enough to let streaks of gold pour through. The landscape glowed like something remembering how to live. She spoke without turning. "You remind me of him in some ways." Colt didn't answer right away. When he did, it was soft. "You remind me of someone too. But not who you'd expect." She faced him. "Who?" "Myself. A long time ago. When I still believed storms always passed." She studied him a moment longer, then gathered her things. "Let's ride. I want to reach the river before night." They mounted up and continued their journey. The road narrowed again, and trees closed in, forming a tunnel of green and shadow. The rain was long gone now, but its scent lingered in the leaves, and the earth held its memory in the way it gave softly beneath their horses' steps. As they rode, Eve spoke again. "He had this idea that when we were old, we'd open a school. Teach children to work with their hands. Build something. Sounds like a good life." "It would have been. You could still make it." She looked at him, half smiling. "With who?" He didn't look away. "You'll know when." She said nothing, but the silence between them warmed a little more. That night, they made camp beneath a willow tree that bowed low beside the river. Colt made a small fire with practiced ease, and she gathered stones and stacked them like her husband once did, forming a small circle, steady and sure. They ate jerked beef and beans, and the stars blinked awake above them, scattered and brilliant. No clouds. Just the endless hush of sky. "Tell me something true," she said. Colt stirred the coals with a stick. "I don't believe in second chances. Not for myself." "Why?" "Because I didn't do enough the first time." She nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. Tell me something true." She turned her face toward the stars. "Sometimes I dream he's still alive, that he faked his death, and I'll find him standing by a fence, hammer in hand, smiling. And when you wake, I lie still and listen for his breath beside me. It never comes." They didn't speak after that. The fire burned low, and the river whispered on. She didn't cry. But when she lay down to sleep, she let herself drift with her hand near the revolver, and the photo beneath her blanket. And on the other side of the fire, Colt stayed awake long past her, watching the shadows move across her sleeping face, like someone who finally understood the shape of someone else's grief. When morning came, it brought a sky so blue it felt unreal. They broke camp without speaking. The trail to Bitter Ridge waited like a question neither one of them could yet answer. But they rode toward it together, with something unspoken between them, something just beginning to take root in the soil left soft by so much rain. The trail into Bitter Ridge was bone-dry despite the rains, dust curling up behind the horses like old smoke. Where Larkspur had the soft decay of forgotten dreams, Bitter Ridge wore its cruelty like a second skin. Buildings leaned inward, as if whispering about the people passing through, who they were, who they pretended to be. Signs dangled half-nailed, and a bitter wind stirred the grit, carrying the scent of old iron, horse sweat, and the kind of men who laughed with empty eyes. Eve reined in just outside the town's edge, her hand on the saddle horn. Her gaze flicked across the crooked skyline. Saloon, stables, blacksmith, a sheriff's office that looked more decorative than useful, and several cabins that bore no signs of life except sagging porches and doors hung like warnings. Colt stopped beside her, his expression unreadable. "This place smells wrong." "They all do, eventually," she said. Her voice was low, like the hush before a storm. She nudged her horse forward, and they rode in without ceremony, without fanfare. Two figures cloaked in dust and silence. They dismounted near the general store, tying their horses beneath the skeletal remains of a once shaded awning. A child watched them from the window, one eye visible through a crack in the warped wood. Eve didn't wave. She'd learned children could sense who carried grief. It marked her like soot. "Where do we start?" Colt asked. "Information first. Then the face." He nodded. "Saloon. Always the saloon." The Bitter Ridge Saloon had no name. Just two swinging doors weathered to a pale gray and a cracked mirror behind the bar that reflected everything and nothing. Inside, The air hung thick with heat and the breath of men who'd stopped caring whether the sun rose or not. A piano stood in the corner, untouched. The only sound was the scrape of boots on the floor and the occasional clink of glass. They stepped through the doors like ghosts arriving for judgment. Heads turned. Then a few turned back, uninterested. A couple lingered too long. Eve moved to the bar. The barkeep was narrow-faced and indifferent, his shirt stained with something dark that might have been wine but wasn't. He didn't ask questions. Just poured. "Looking for someone," she said quietly. "Scar down the left cheek. Gambler. Might go by Rafe." The barkeep didn't blink. "Don't know names. But you know faces." He looked at her, eyes narrowed. "Maybe I do. Maybe I don't." Colt stepped closer, not threatening, but grounding. His presence alone shifted the weight in the room. The barkeep glanced at him, then back at Eve. "Try the blacksmith. He drinks here. Gambles sometimes with the ranch boys." They left without thanking him. Some truths didn't need politeness. Outside, the light had begun to slant. Late afternoon painted the world in brass and bruised gold. They followed the sound of iron on steel to a shack tucked behind the saloon. The forge was small, red-hot at the center, but the man working it had arms like coiled rope and a face half hidden beneath a hat brim. He looked up once, then went back to hammering. Eve waited until he finished the stroke. Then she said, "Will Calder. You remember him?" The hammer paused midair. Slowly, the man set it down. "Worked with him once," he said. His voice was gravel and memory. "Good man." "He's dead," she said simply. "I heard. Gun job gone wrong. Payroll escort. You remember who else was on that job?" He studied her now, taking in her coat, her eyes, the set of her shoulders. "I do. Rafe." The name cracked something open. He didn't flinch, but he didn't deny it. Wasn't his name back then. Called himself Luke. Quick hand, smart mouth. Scar down his face. Left cheek. Said it was from a branding iron. Never explained why. Where is he now? Moves around. Comes back every few weeks. Gambles with the wrong kind of men. Sells information, plays cards, stirs trouble. Last I heard, he was staying out at the Dunley Ranch. Left this morning. Eve turned to Colt. "You know it." He nodded. "About 7 miles east. Cattle outfit. Fenced land. Trouble there's old and layered." The blacksmith wiped his hands on a cloth, then reached beneath the bench. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in rough cloth. "Will left this here once. Said it was a surprise for you. Never came back to finish it." She took the bundle with shaking hands. Inside was a small iron brooch shaped like a sprig of wild yarrow, her favorite flower. The metal was unfinished, edges rough, but the intent was unmistakable. Grief rose sharp in her throat. She swallowed it like fire. "Thank you," she whispered. The blacksmith nodded. "If you find that man, widow, make sure he knows why." She stepped back into the waning light, the weight of the unfinished brooch pressed tight in her palm. They rode toward Dunley Ranch with dusk breathing down their necks, the sky bleeding crimson behind them. Shadows stretched long across the grass, and the wind carried the first scent of night, cool, bitter, full of secrets. "You ready?" Colt asked, not looking at her. "No," she said honestly. "But I'll go anyway." The ranch rose out of the land like a scar, fences crooked, cattle bones piled behind the barn. A lantern burned in the main house window, flickering like someone dared the darkness to come closer. They tied their horses behind a clump of brush and approached on foot. The porch creaked as they stepped onto it, but no one came to meet them. Colt knocked once, firm. The door opened slowly. A man in a sweat-stained shirt leaned out. Mid-40s, sharp jaw, eyes too bright. His left cheek bore a scar that twisted through the stubble like lightning across a field. Recognition hit her so hard she couldn't breathe. He didn't flinch when he saw her. Just smiled. "I'll be damned," he said. Didn't expect to see you walkin' in with the likes of him. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He leaned against the doorframe. Heard you'd been sniffing around. Shame, really. Will was a good man. Dumb, but good. You killed him, she said. I did, he admitted, as if discussing the weather. And I'd do it again. He got in the way. The world narrowed to that single moment. The pounding in her ears, the grip on the revolver at her side, the sting of the unfinished brooch still warm in her pocket. You want to shoot me now? He asked. Or make it dramatic? Colt took a step forward, but Eve raised a hand. Her voice was calm, deadly. Why? Rafe shrugged. He thought he was saving someone, but he didn't understand what kind of game he'd walked into. I had debts. Big ones. The kind you don't walk away from unless you leave someone else behind. You chose him. I chose me. She drew the gun slowly. Colt didn't move. Rafe's smile faded, just slightly. You shoot me here, he said, and you get nothing. No answers. No peace. I don't need peace, she said. I need it to end. But she didn't fire. Instead, she stepped back. You're not worth the bullet. Rafe blinked, confused. Colt moved forward, gun drawn. Step outside, he said. We're taking you in. Rafe hesitated, but Colt's voice left no room for argument. He stepped into the dusk, hands raised. Eve followed, revolver still ready. From the distance, hoofs thundered. The sheriff and 2 deputies, called ahead by Colt's message rider, left in town. They surrounded the porch without words, steel flashing beneath the stars. Rafe laughed once, short and bitter. All this for me? No, Eve said. This is for him. The sheriff cuffed him, read the charges, and led him to the wagon. Rafe looked over his shoulder once, eyes full of mockery. You'll never feel better, he said. Maybe not, she replied. But I'll feel done. The wagon rolled away, dust swallowing the sound of chains. Eve stood still, the revolver still in her hand, the brooch clutched in the other. Colt came to her side, quiet as always. I thought I'd want him dead, she said. But that would have made him the end of the story. He doesn't get to be that. Colt nodded. He's just the middle. She turned to him, face pale in the moonlight. What comes after? He met her gaze. That's yours to write. She looked out across the land, the ranch shrinking into shadow, the sky stretching wide and clean above them. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lost. She felt ready. And somewhere far ahead, the next chapter waited, quiet and patient, like a road finally dry enough to ride. The ride back into Larkspur was long and wordless, save for the wind curling through the canyons and the far-off growl of thunder pacing the mountains like something old and restless. Eve rode with her head high, her spine straight, but inside she was unraveling quietly, thread by thread. The man who'd stolen her husband's life was behind bars now, his laughter caged, his eyes no longer hunting the horizon. But justice wasn't the clean feeling she thought it might be. It was hollow in places, sharper in others, like wearing a dress stitched by hands that didn't know your shape. Still, it fit well enough to stand in. Colt rode beside her, ever silent, the kind of presence that didn't press but still filled the space beside you. He hadn't said much since the arrest, but she'd caught him watching her more than once. Not out of curiosity, but concern. As if he knew she'd come to the end of something, and endings, no matter how righteous, always left ash behind. The sky darkened as they entered the outskirts of town. Storm clouds curled above like fists, heavy with the promise of release. Thunder echoed low and long, a drumbeat for the inevitable. Eve didn't mind the coming rain. It matched the rhythm of her own unsettled blood. Larkspur looked smaller now, as most places do after you return with your ghosts laid to rest. The saloon lights glowed weakly behind warped glass. The girl in the blue dress stood in the doorway for a breath, then vanished, curtain-like. A boy ran across the street with a bucket of water and a face full of mud. No one paused to greet them. They stabled the horses and walked through town without a word. Eve's boots struck the boards with a steady beat, Colt's just behind. It wasn't until they reached the center of the street, between the sheriff's office and the saloon, that a voice rang out, sharp and thin as broken glass. "I heard he's alive." They turned. The man who'd mocked her the first day, Mace, stepped out from under the awning, drunk again, bitter again, but this time coiled tighter. His eyes were red-rimmed and mean. "I heard Rafe didn't get hanged. That he's in a cell, eating stew and smirking," Mace slurred. "And you let him live." Eve didn't move. Her hand hovered near her hip, not on the gun, but close. "What of it?" she asked. Mace spat. "You come in here with that look, that gun like a ghost huntin' blood, and then what? You drag him to a cell like a schoolmarm? That's not justice. That's cowardice." Colt stepped forward, slow and calm. "Go home, Mace." But Mace shook his head. "No. No more of this. This town's turned soft. Letting women wander in, pretending they're gunslingers. Letting murderers breathe just 'cause some broken widow can't pull a trigger." Eve watched him. Something behind his eyes sparked. Shame, grief, something twisted. She realized then he wasn't just angry at her. He was angry at a world that had passed him by, at a life that hadn't panned out. Maybe he'd known Will. Maybe he'd once fancied himself brave, too. She stepped forward. The rain began, light at first, then building fast, until it struck the roofs like pebbles. "You want to feel brave again," she said. "You want to pick a fight you think you can win?" Mace's hand moved fast, but not fast enough. Her revolver was out before he cleared leather, her body turned sideways, stance grounded. The shot cracked like lightning across the mountains. His gun went spinning from his grip, landing in the mud with a dull thud. She hadn't hit him, just the weapon. Deliberate. Controlled. He stood there, arms shaking, face pale. She walked toward him, rain soaking her coat, dripping from the brim of her hat like melted silver. "You think justice means blood," she said, voice cutting through the storm. "You think a bullet in a back makes the hurt stop?" Mace said nothing. "I've seen a good man bleed out in my arms. I've tracked his killer across miles and lies. And I stood with that killer in my sights and chose not to make him the end of me." She pointed to the mud where his pistol lay. "You were never ready for what I've done. Go home, Mace. Or stay here and drown in your own bitterness. Either way, I'm done with you." He backed away, something shattered in his gaze. He stumbled off, boots slipping, disappearing into the storm like a story gone sour. Eve turned, the revolver still warm in her hand. Colt stood exactly where he'd been, watching her. She holstered the gun slowly, walked toward him. "I thought it would feel like peace," she said, "but it doesn't." "No," he said. "It feels like standing on a grave and realizing you're still breathing." The wind picked up, howling down the alleyways, bending signs and rattling shutters. Thunder cracked overhead, full-throated now. Eve looked up into the storm. "Do you think he'd be proud?" she asked softly. Colt considered. "He'd be proud you didn't become what hurt you." She nodded, closing her eyes. Let the rain wash the gunpowder from her fingers, the ache from her chest. When she opened them again, he was still there. And then he reached out, slow, careful, and touched her shoulder. Not possessive, not pity, just steady. "I don't know what comes next," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to ride toward it." She looked at him, this man who had walked beside her through silence, fire, and dusk. Not trying to fix her. Not asking for more than she could give. "I could leave tomorrow," she said. "You could." "I could stay a little longer." "You could." She smiled then, small but real. The kind that breaks through after the ground has been cracked by rain for weeks. "I don't want to be a ghost anymore." Colt nodded. "Then let's start living." The storm rolled above them, wild and full of sound. But it didn't touch what passed between them, something steady and new, born not of rescue, but recognition. They walked down the street together, boots splashing through puddles, shoulders just brushing. Behind them, the town exhaled. Somewhere, the piano began again, soft and uncertain. And above, the thunder rolled on, not as a threat, but a benediction. Because sometimes justice is a bullet. Sometimes it's a choice not to fire. But sometimes, it's just a moment when someone sees you clearly, and stays.